Yeah, I think they need more money for new trains, but
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm happy to report we have quorum.
okay.
Yay.
Yay.
Hello, and it was the last one to arrive. So thank you all for holding down the fort for me. It's wonderful to see everybody on the call today. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'll be facilitating the meeting today. My name is Lila Blanchard, and I am the co-chair of this committee. And today, Nicole is off on vacation. Nicole Green is having a great time somewhere else, so we are missing her, but we are really glad for all the folks who are joining, including Dale, who is joining us today. So that's my welcome and introduction. And then I'll go ahead and call on Dr. Michelle Hernandez next.
Are we doing introductions?
Yes, please.
Dr. Michelle Hernandez, Concord, California. Excited to be here. It seems like it's been a long time. Looking forward to working with our new members. Thank you.
Thank you. And then Dale Harrington.
Yes, thank you. Yep, a new member. Been an observer before, but a new member. So I'm pleased to be here.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And then Nicole, could you please call on the rest of the folks for their introductions, since the board members on this committee have already introduced themselves?
Sure. Jana, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Jenna Evans, Office of Education, Game Plan for Success program inside the 3 county jails.
And Mark. Mark is a
Yeah,
CAB member.
Yeah, I'm an alternate CAB member, but I sit on the outreach and community engagement subcommittee. I'm up in Oakley, so I'm in East Contra Costa County.
Great. And Crawford.
I'm Crawford Carpenter, and I'm a CAB member, and I'm on the outreach and community engagement subcommittee with Mark.
Alicia.
Good morning, Alicia Knuckles, and I'm representative for Supervisor Diane Burgess.
Patrice.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Patrice Guillory, ORJ. Happy to be here.
Then I'm Nicole Popchak, also with ORJ. And I think that's everybody.
Thank you so much, Nicole. And Nicole, I'm hoping that we can utilize your notes for this meeting, since normally I would be taking notes alternately, but if we could go with your notes, that would be wonderful.
I am taking notes. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. So let's go ahead and move to the approval of the minutes from July 15th, 2021, our CAB Programs and Services Subcommittee meeting. Those notes are a little bit long, and so I'm not expecting anyone to be able to read them in 2 minutes, but I'd like to just give 2 minutes to review, and then if any of the members of this subcommittee would like to make a motion to approve, please, unmute yourself and begin that process. Nicole, would you mind also scrolling to the notes on the projected screen? Thank you. All right. Is any members of the subcommittee ready to make a motion to approve these notes?
I motion to approve the notes for July 15th.
I'll second.
Great. Nicole, can you call out the vote for us? If
Sure,
that's
was there any public comment on it? Does anyone have? Okay, Lila,
yes.
Gail,
Yes.
Dr. Hernandez,
Yes,
motion passes unanimously.
And thank you. I do want to just take one step back and make sure that I gave opportunity for a public comment on any item under the jurisdiction of the Community Advisory Board and not on this agenda. I didn't hear that in the announcements, but I want to just double check and see. All right. Nicole, is it possible to make this a little bit bigger? When your screen was projected earlier, it was nice and visible, and now for some reason it's showing us. Great, excellent.
Is that better?
Yeah, that's better. Wonderful. So the next item on the agenda is number 4, to discuss transition to in-person meetings after executive order expires on 9/30/21.
I'm happy to provide an update on that, or I don't know if everyone is aware of the announcement that was made at the last CAB meeting last month. But yes, I mean, basically the agenda item speaks kind of for itself. For come 9:30, we are required, or after 9:30, we're required to meet in person for committee work. And I have secured a location in the downtown Martinez area, specifically the CAO's office, the new building off of Escobar Street, for all of CAB's full body and subcommittees, including this one. And one of the reasons that we wanted to agendize this is one of the challenges was timing. As you might be aware that Aura J is a back-to-back. We end this one at 1 and then we have to jump on another committee that we're staffed for at 1 p.m. And though we've been able to somewhat manage that for Zoom, when we're in person, that's going to not allow us time between meetings to set up and transition. So I was able to move up the meeting from 11:30 to 10:30 and wanted to discuss with the group a couple things, whether or not, in person is a challenge in general, but also the time change.
Nicole, what is that address on Escobar Street?
Look, I think it's 1025 Escobar, but I have to double check that to make sure. Here, just give me a second. And I'll put it in the chat as well.
Oh, thank you.
I remember that we were kind of thinking about a couple of different options. One of them being ending the meeting earlier, and another one being starting it a little bit earlier. I think at the last meeting, I was the one with the conflict at 10:30 in person. I am willing to work with that if that's the best, option and solution that we have, and especially in view of, it's basically, three, I want to say like, 3 more meetings that are remaining in the year. So it's not ideal, but if it's our only true option at the moment, I would definitely make it work. Does this work for other folks? Once a month, Thursdays, 10:30 to noon would be the suggestion, Nicole?
Yes.
Yeah, that works for me. This is Dale.
That works for me too, Dr. Hernandez.
Let's make it happen then.
All right, so, yeah, so you'll expect your agendas looking slightly different next month, and we'll, for those that we're coordinating that with, we can get more into that later, but essentially you'll have a physical address, but we are also working on for the public to be able to join by Zoom, and that's still kind of in the works, so.
Nicole, is it possible that the board of supervisors might extend the Zoom opportunity for us?
So it would be the governor of California that would extend the executive order.
Oh, okay. Oh,
If
okay.
he extends that beyond 9:30, then depending on the stipulations of that order, that might expand this continuing to be an alternative for us. So we are following that very closely, as closely as possible, and we'll be letting you guys know any impact.
Right.
And any impact there. So you
He's
can
been-
join by Zoom, the members, but you have to post your location. And I know that might be somewhat intrusive, especially if it's your home, to post your physical home address on the agenda and allow public to come and knock on your door. And
Do we have to
but it's
provide,
an option.
do we have to provide treats?
Not to my knowledge.
Great, well, we'll look forward to the updated invite for the folks on this subcommittee and other folks who attend regularly. And thank you so much, Nicole, and all of the ORJ for working really hard to make all of these changes within this short period of time. And my understanding is we probably won't know until the end of September if there's going to be some kind of a change in this. So we'll be planning to meet next month in person, unless we hear otherwise from the ORJ.
Yeah, I did go down there this week, and I would caution to leave some time for parking. It's meter parking. There is some first come, first serve free parking, non-meter parking. But yeah, I would leave some time for that.
Will do. Thank you so much. Great. So now we're going to be moving to item number 5, review restorative justice circle examples. And I am really excited. Mark Thomas, I was not here at the last meeting when I know that you shared some of your experience and involvement with restorative justice programs. And so I'm really excited to hear from you today. I'm not sure if ORJ has anything else that they'd like to add before Mark begins sharing with us about the SF Sheriff's Department implemented restorative justice programs.
No, I mean, I know we have a bullet there for our update. Unfortunately, I don't have an update. Still connecting with the DA to get clarity on formal adult restorative justice programs in the works within the county.
Got it. Well, thank you. I will take that opportunity just to mention very briefly that we did have a presentation from the chat program many months ago at this point regarding their services, and it's a collaborative model that does offer restorative justice circles for folks with connection within Contra Costa County to domestic violence. And so that program is continuing, and it is the agency that is coordinating that is the Family Justice Center, as well as the newly created chat program. agency. So that is actually funded by the Innovative Response to Marginalized Victims Fund with the Office of Emergency Services. So that was just a brief update on one of the programs that did a presentation here and is not funded directly through ORJ. Any questions on that brief update before I do turn it over to Mark? All right, Mark.
Okay, thank you. Well, I asked Nicole also when my time is up, let me know or give me a minute notice if I start going. There's a lot of stuff to discuss, but we don't have hours, and hours wouldn't even get it all fitted in. It's like a lifetime work of learning here. Is it all right if I use the share screen?
Do you have materials that you're presenting?
Yeah, I wanted to show the website of the programs that I found out about, if that's allowed.
I think that that's okay. I don't know, Patrice, or maybe even Alicia, if you could speak to that.
It's agendized. You can share the websites and that sort of thing, not a problem.
Let me know if you're able to click share the screen without me having to give you permissions. I don't think I need to.
Okay. Well, let me know if anything isn't correct to show on the screen. Well, whatever that is, let me see. So I did look, well, first thing I did in regard to this, some people are interested in bringing restorative justice to Contra Costa County. And I mentioned that I had been involved with the San Francisco County Sheriff's Department, and they had implemented restorative justice. So I went to their website. So this is one of their programs. And so there's two sides of restorative justice. I like to define the terms because it can get conflated or confused with other things like social justice. They both can overlap, but restorative justice is a particular approach. And so we have restorative practices used in an environment that involves a victim and offender, or someone who's been harmed and someone who's done harm. We don't always use victim and offender. Most restorative justice practices are actually going on in the schools and not in the criminal justice system. So it's been in San Francisco Unified and Oakland Unified. And they usually say it takes about 5 years to get it going so it's implemented and stable, because often it's counterculture for most people in this country and they reject it. So you have to really bear down on it. So they've had it both in those schools, so they don't call the kids who get into a fight or bully each other victims and offenders. But restorative justice is actually victim-centered. But in actually to have a real restorative circle or conference, you need both there at the same time. However, you can work on both sides. So here they have a program that focuses on victims of domestic and random violence. It's a survivor restorative program. So they use restorative practices there, which involve the circles, sharing, healing circles, self-reflection. And then they also have in the Sheriff's Department, the Resolve to Stop the Violence Project. That program focuses on the men who have committed domestic violence. So in the jails, they have these pods and they have actually different programs and different pods. So I contacted the people who do the Resolve to Stop the Violence program. Their community works west. So you can find them on this webpage. So, and they have the problem, so you can see here, they have Resolve to Stop the Violence Project. So I did talk to two of the men involved with that a few weeks ago. And currently, of course, because of the pandemic, a lot of the programs are currently shut down and they're not going on. So they're waiting to get back in it. So those are two things. And they referred me to Restorative Community Counseling. They're another group that does this type of thing. So you can start the process by focusing on one side, either the men who do the violence or the women who do the violence, but it's always not, you know, women totally on one side and men on the other side. But it's really actually hard, I found in my experience, to get both both sides together at one time to face each other. So it does take a lot of work on both sides. For instance, men to realize they have the issue and they need to take responsibility for their behavior and change. So that's one part. So let me show, let's see how much time we got left. I wanted to show you one thing about what I learned about implementing it. The man who made the difference in San Francisco County was this man called Michael Markham. And Michael Markham—
If you want to know what life is really like inside an American prison, you have a choice. You can talk to a jailer and get the story from his perspective, or you can talk to an inmate and get the story from his. Or, as we reported last year, you can talk to Michael Markham, who may know more about prisons than anyone else in this country. That's because he's been on both sides of the bars. His title is Assistant Sheriff for San Francisco County, #3 man in the department, in charge.
So I was saying, you can look at this later. This is on YouTube. This is 60 Minutes with Michael Markham. I had Googled it, so I won't show the whole thing. But that's the real deal in there. And what's so interesting about Michael Markham is they'll tell you through this whole piece, he was 6 years in prison, right in the Bay Area, because he had shot and killed his father way back in the 60s over domestic. So it actually was domestic violence, but he worked his way up from a rehabilitation counselor until being the assistant sheriff, third in charge. So it was his insight to do the best for both sides, law enforcement, victims, and offender, that he implemented these programs. So that's one of the part thing. He had the power to do it. And then he had Michael Hennessy, who was a very progressive sheriff at the time. And then he also had, of course, San Francisco was a little more progressive. So it worked for a while. Of course, there was a lot of resistance, especially from the law enforcement staff. But eventually, over years, it got embedded. Of course, things change over time. So even in San Francisco, the people who do the programs don't feel that everybody's enthusiastic as much as they used to. So that's part of the issue. You need the whole community to make it work. The law enforcement, the non, what you call it, the ones who don't have official badges, your voters, you know, everyone has to be part of it to make it work. Those are some of the things. So it is possible. There are organizations like, you know, Rubicon has the reentry success, so they're doing things. You have Community Works West, they do RSVP, so they're available. And there's other people who are engaged in this process. So I just met Michael Markham back in 1997 because I was a graduate student. I had just got out of prison 3 years earlier and started in psychology. So I do have a background in psychology, but it's the real experience that makes it different. So actually, restorative practices is a social science. Science backs up the practices actually have a positive effect. They reduce harm and violence and promote healing. But it's not just one side against another. So it's not true. Sometimes in social justice, it tends to be one side against another. In restorative justice, there could be sides, but they all decide to work together as a team. So that's the big push. Michael Markham also did education, was their major thing. And of course, even with men in prison, it only works if they volunteer for it. If you force them to do it, it doesn't work well. But he got them to do it. And I worked in that exact jail. So I did a paper on him. I called him up after seeing the 60-minute piece, and he let me do an interview with him. So I interviewed him about his own life and how he got where he was going. So that was one of my best papers. Because even when he got out, it was a turning point for him. He realized what he was doing. Wasn't just about him. It was about all the people he was in a relationship. Because he adopted a lot of children, but he still isolated himself mentally and emotionally from them. And then that broke. And so he decided to implement this in the jails. He's the one who invented the pod jails, where you have one law enforcement agent in the center, and he can see all the cells from the center. It's not that, rows, it's a circle. So you just need one man and it reduces the violence. That's actually his idea, and it's implemented in San Francisco also. So I'll stop there and take any questions if anyone has any.
This is Dale, Mark. This has been fascinating and so informative. And there's a lot of links that it seems to me we could follow up on and learn more. Great. Thank you so very much.
Yeah, it goes on and on. But I just keep focusing. It's our social will we need to make it work. Because even though we don't think it, we've grown, we're products of culture, not just what we think is right, but it's deep-seated. So when you present this thing to people and it goes against their idea, for instance, that people who do wrong should be punished, it takes a lot to change that. And so we easily won't want to go with it, but it can be done. It can be. Just prove to me that it can be done, because in Oakland, after 5 years of having it in the schools, when a couple of years ago, remember they had a budget crunch and they cut out the restorative justice program. Let go all the people, that specialists in school. The parents demanded it back. They said, no, we really need this because it makes a difference, because it stops the school to prison pipeline. So, and they got it back too. So if that had happened 6 months after they had started, it wouldn't have come back. But once people learn that it works, then, and they're interested in the well-being of their children, they'll do it. But I think domestic violence, focusing on that issue is one way to get to it. It's a major issue. It causes a lot of harm and deaths, even to law enforcement, around domestic violence. So it'd be something that make a big difference. And you can deal with both sides separately at first. But it's one of the most difficult, well, it's one of the most important, because those people have relationships that should be healed. So that's one thing we say restorative justice does, is heal the relationship, because it's not just two isolated people that can just say goodbye, I don't have to see you again. No, they've built things up over years. They got children that you just can't like totally reject either side out. So it's most helpful if they can. Doesn't mean you have to talk to them or see them, but at least it's a positive change, at least for the good of the children. But it's not easy, but that's what I see as the possibilities. And
so folks, if you have questions, you can just come off of, yeah, actually, sorry, Dr. Michelle, I don't know if you have any questions. I do have some questions. I can go with those, and then we can take questions from everyone. So you mentioned the RSVP program towards the end. We did have a presentation from Community Works West, also months back, the same day that we had a presentation from the chat program. Can you say a little bit about what the RSVP program is? And then I have one more question.
Oh, well, so it focuses on men who are usually, it starts while they're in prison, in the jail, and they can volunteer for this program while they're in the jail. So it focuses on dealing with their impulses to commit violence. So often the RSVP program, they have to take responsibility for what they're doing, but they do that by recognizing they have something. Well, when I was involved with it, I mean, not as a participant, but they have something called like the hitman. And the hitman gets triggered by different things, like how come my dinner isn't home? I mean, my dinner isn't done and I'm home. You know, why are you on the telephone? And he says, well, I had something to do. And then the hitman comes out because he feels, okay, you've done something to me. So he hits. I mean, that's just put a symbol on them. So they have to work on what triggers them the violence and rehabilitate themselves or transform it. So they do the groups, they do restorative practices, circles, reflections, having people challenge you. So it's an intensive type of program. And they have a pod for it over in the San Bruno jail.
Great, thank you for that. And then, so the programs that are offered at San Francisco, and specifically the victim and offender, services for DV that are there, what specific pieces from that program would you advocate for in Contra Costa County?
Well, of course, we should have survivor restoration. We might already have some of that, but I think the RSVP has proven successful. And so deal with the people who are doing the most harm, who are usually the men in the jails. I know they get put in the jails, but they don't necessarily change much when they get out. Same things will trigger them. So I've been through the process of reentry too. I did, but mine was bank robbery. And I got out after 2 years I was an honor college student. So they figured, okay, 2 years, I'm back. Nope, back, same situation, same triggers, same behavior. I escalated though. So yeah, I think working on the men in the jails. I did go into a detention center once and talk to them. And you can make a difference with them by explaining certain things to them. For instance, you sitting here in the jail feeling sorry for yourself, and it hurts your feeling to connect with your family because it's painful. So they put the tough facade up and they don't want to talk to many, they're tough. So they avoid actually communicating with their children because it pains them. But I have to explain to them, when you do that, your kids think you don't care anything about them and you've abandoned them and you actually start them down the same road. So, and you see some of the light bulb go on and said, oh, right. So he said, I should just get over my own suffering and pain and take it for them. Yeah, so you can make a difference to them. I think they do pay attention to you if you've been through it. So that's part of the thing. A lot of people in the San Francisco County jails are formerly incarcerated. Of course, if you have your assistant sheriff formerly incarcerated, so that sets a tone. And I worked in there also. I was formerly incarcerated, working in the jails as a teacher later. I worked for 3 years as a teacher. So I know how some of them they are. They have, some of them have, half of my psychology class, half of them deep-rooted misogyny, and they get stimulated for violence against women. They might not see them doing it. I see them when they do it because I show videos like that to them and I could see how they react. So yeah, we have some serious work to do, but it starts very early though. See, that's the issue. You just can't say, okay, I'm gonna stop. You gotta do some work. And restorative practices, I think, are the best. It's not just the individual, it's our whole male group conformity that we have to change. So
thank you, Mark, so much for speaking to your experience. And it sounds like when you were working in San Francisco, did you also get the opportunity to participate in some of these restorative justice circles or programs?
yeah, well, I sat in them. Well, actually, I did them when I wasn't working there as a volunteer. I'm an alternative violence project facilitators. We're in a lot of the prisons. So I did full-time workshops with the men for, 20-hour workshops over a weekend. And so I've done that with them. I've sat in on the RSVP and I still do men mentoring men, but it's people who are on parole or on probation now. We have it weekly. So that's part of probation. That helps. See, they start coming to a group where men have a different attitude. Even if they were gang bangers or domestic violence or whatever they're in there for, that gives them support to know that, you don't have to play this, well, when you're offended, you can change your image of what it means to be a man. So a warrior can be somebody who defends and sacrifices themselves rather than beating up whatever that they don't like. You can kind of change it for them for a while. But all of them are really just children that didn't mature enough in a lot of my views. That's what's going on, who've been abused when they were young and bullied by bigger people, and they just passing it on.
Yeah. Yeah, Dr. Michelle, did you have any questions for Mark about his presentation?
No, I'm grateful. Thank you so much. That was an awesome presentation.
Any questions from anyone else for Mark? Any points of dialogue, kind of ideas you want to open up after listening to what Mark had to share regarding restorative justice in Contra Costa County?
Well, I just wanted to note, first of all, thank you, Mark, for that awesome presentation. And I wanted to highlight that, in your talking points, in your ambassador talking points that were approved during the last CAB meeting, you all mentioned that you wanted to recommend an expansion of services or resources that are an alternative to incarceration, namely diversion and restorative justice programming. And so I think now that you all have heard from so many different providers and even from Mark's experience as well, I think you have a very compelling argument, if you will, when you do meet with various department heads and the various supervisors to sort of share how restorative justice can not only be effective, but in what ways it can actually be implemented across the county. So that's something you all might want to think about as you put together your policy brief as well. And we'll have more conversations about that in future general body meetings. But just wanted to make sure that all the members are kind of keeping that in their mind of how to really describe in detail what is it you would like to see around restorative justice for the reentry population.
I just had one last comment. So if we promote it, we should be clear on what our definitions of the words are so people know what you're talking about, because people really have many different ideas when they hear restorative justice, and it's not really what's correct. I'm going by IIRP. I took a trainings with them. I'm a certified trainer from them. And so that's a good page to get the basic definitions down, because people have many different ideas. If you just say that word, sure what they're talking about. And some people think it makes things unsafe for law enforcement, but actually it makes everything safer for everyone. So that's one of the pushing points. Is not that someone should, they have to maybe change the way they do things, but it doesn't make it more unsafe for people. It's more challenging though, not unsafe.
Thank you, Mark. Yes, I made a note of that, and I feel like maybe that's something that we could, complete at next meeting is, basically having some examples of, what we're talking about when we're talking about restorative justice, and clearly defining what we're recommending with that. I love that. And Patrice, I'm really glad that you brought up the policy brief, because this is leading, us towards recommendations for that. And I just wanted to square myself in the time frame again for that. I know, we have on our work plan that we'll get to a little bit later, in November to have any memo due. When do we need to have our recommendations to, the policy and budget subcommittee around, language for the policy and brief?
So our timeline shifted just a bit And I'd say that I know that we are planning, correct me if I'm wrong, Nicole, we're planning to have at least a first draft for the October 7th general body meeting. So you will have from the general body meeting and then the next policy and budget subcommittee meeting, which I believe will be on the,
And 15, October 15th.
October 15th.
Mhm.
So those are two, at least for those meetings, prior to, preferably, those two meetings, you're more than welcome to, if you want something, you know, some notes or what have you that you want to put in writing, you're more than welcome to send that to ORJ and make sure it gets included in the draft for folks to then discuss at those two meetings. So the general body will be the first sort of draft. That's October 7th, and then the subcommittee, policy and budget subcommittee on the 15th will likely see an updated draft, and we'll deliberate from there. So, and this is all in preparation for likely a presentation to the CCP meeting on November 5th.
Great, thank you. And so Nicole, our next programs and services subcommittee meeting would not be until after both of those dates, or do we meet
Correct.
1 week?
It'll be
Okay.
10/21 would be the next time you guys meet.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, that's good to keep in mind, you know, with the remainder of the time of the meeting that we have, if, you know, there are any next steps as far as language and specificity, you know, for that process. Yeah, anybody else have any questions or comments on, you know, for Mark's presentation and or on the topic of restorative justice? Then I do have just a couple of brainstorm ideas that came to me while you were presenting, Mark.
Dale, since Mark, you mentioned a different, not viewpoints, but understandings of restorative justice. I know I would certainly appreciate seeing something that provided what you would identify as being involved in it.
Okay. Well, maybe on the side, I can do a presentation for people who want to know more about restorative justice and the way I've learned it. Because that's what I do. I've been doing that since the pandemic anyway, for people all around the world. So if interested, I'll talk to you. We'll decide on a time where I could do that separately, and people can come.
Yeah, I'd be interested in that too. So keep me in the loop.
Okay.
Me three, yeah. Oh, it just turned into another meeting. Never mind. Yeah. Oh, I know, right? That quorum piece there. So, you know.
Well, if I can, Lila, if it is of great interest to the group to have that, I mean, we can always schedule a special meeting. We just need whatever materials you're going to use, Mark. We just need them in advance. We need to, you know, find a date that's convenient for everyone, and you know, you welcome the public to listen in as well. Certainly don't want to hold up an opportunity if folks really want, and that could be just the main agenda item, is just the training, if you will, or of restorative justice or restorative practices from what you experienced, Mark.
Yeah, and alternatively, it could even be part of next month's meeting if Mark was comfortable with that. Yeah. Mark, maybe you can let us know what you would prefer, if you would like to keep it very small, or, you know, open it up to a special meeting, or present at one of our future meetings along that topic.
Okay.
All right. Great. And so I think a question came to my mind, and maybe somebody on this call might know, as you were presenting, Mark. So I'm curious if anyone knows if there are places in the United States where there are restorative justice circles between law enforcement officers and between folks involved in the criminal justice system. Could be after incarceration. I'm just curious, like you mentioned, kind of some of the dynamic between, law enforcement officers needing to feel like this was also part of their safety. And I'm just curious if folks know if that space, exists. I've heard different things on NPR about, actual police officers being, victims of, violent incidents. And then, getting to meet with those individuals later and going through some restorative justice process. But it was a thought that came to my mind, and I just wanted to see if anyone had an answer to that question, or kind of another thought about, where services might go, for restorative justice. Okay, we'll leave that at a brainstorm, and just an idea that, that came to me, that and a curiosity. One thing that I did hear you saying, Mark, was that the importance of having restorative justice opportunities available for individuals while they're incarcerated. Can anyone on this call speak to what those services might look like in Contra Costa County right now, or is that part of the information that's pending?
In terms of RJ programs in the custodial setting?
Yes.
I know, to my knowledge, with the sheriff's office, presently there's, I think, very limited, if any, programming that's happening at the moment due to restrictions as it relates to COVID. And I don't know if Jana can speak more to that. And I've not known of any history of restorative justice circles being conducted within our county's detention facilities. I could foresee something like that potentially happening in the future for the West County detention facility, especially with the construction and expansion of that particular jail, where there will be more programming space available. But at least presently, to my knowledge, there isn't any restorative justice programming in the detention facilities. Jen, is there anything you wanted to add? You shaking your head. Am I incorrect?
No, you're fine. There's plenty of program options, but none specific to restorative circles. And you're correct, Patrice. Right now, there's no in-person contact and non-contact visits. I know they're talking about starting very small with some non-contact visits with specific programs just to try and see what's happening. But everything for the last almost 2 years has been, at least from our perspective and what we do in the school and reentry, it's all been distance learning, paper, packet, pencil. And we've actually had a good response and good engagement with that, even though we haven't been able to see people in person. And I think part of that is because we really take the time to read what they've sent to us, and then we take the time to personalize letters back every time they send us a completed module or a completed lesson. So I think that personal touch has been keeping them engaged. But at the moment, there's no restorative circle type programming. But I agree with you, Patrice. I think West County would be the most optimal, and or Marsh Creek, to do something like that.
Thank you for that. And, I've also heard the idea of embedding restorative justice programs in existing programs. So, all of these nonprofit partners that, that we have that are working and are part of our system, having, ways for folks to access restorative justice at those locations, after, folks have been released from incarceration. So thank you. That was really helpful. Any last ideas before we move on to the next agenda item of, where we would want to request services for restorative justice? Okay, well, I will move back on to the next point. Nicole, it's so helpful when you project the agenda. Do you mind projecting the agenda again? I'll toggle back over to my other screen with the agenda. Okay. All right, excellent. So the survey results themes from fall 2020. So also some, very important information that we heard, from our partners, from the AV 109, funded community, including, government departments and nonprofit agencies. And so there's two different documents here that overview those themes that came up from those surveys. And again, this survey, we did not do a survey this year because we completed our survey late in the year last year, and we had feedback that we wanted to work with and to move forward with in this subcommittee. So to ground ourselves in these themes, we're going to review them together. And I, was not at the last meeting. And so if there is someone who would like to, add to that purpose, then now would be a great time for that. Okay. So housing came up as a theme, and I like the specificity of this bullet point. I know that we have also been requesting housing, and that is part of our talking points. Here it's talking about different types of housing for, different variations in families, different generations, etc. There's also challenges caused by the pandemic, especially surrounding technology and connections. There has been some work around that happened with the ORJ's advocacy, I'm sure, about getting more resources in that area out to providers. Mental health, employment, lack of resources, a need for program expansion, collaboration between agencies, training, capacity building for service providers, health, MHET, teams expansion, support for more mental health services. And if someone could jump in here and talk a little bit about where we're at with the MET team expansion. I know that's something that we asked for and something that's in process.
So I can speak to that really quickly. So I'm actually in the process of scheduling meetings with forensics to talk about this, since this has come up quite a few times, just to kind of get a sense of their experience implementing the program, what sort of resources would they need to actually expand out to 3 additional jurisdictions. So still more to come on that, but talks will be in motion.
Thank you for that. Great. Nicole, can you go to the next list of themes. And so we got additional responses back, and a few more themes that came up there were clients not staying engaged in programs, and co-occurring substance use and mental health issues, and the need to outreach to community to get the community input. So these are all really amazing and great suggestions, that came from, from all the folks that I mentioned earlier, and are good, topics that we've been looking at, in different ways. So we, as a programs and services subcommittee, we have had, our work plan that we developed where we focused on a few of these issues. I just want to see, what folks' response is to being grounded in these themes again, and see if there is anything that you would like to take time, to discuss that is, not part of our work plan already, that you'd like to highlight from here, or other reactions to these themes. Okay, great. So that's good that we took a look at them, and I do feel like there's information in here that can give work to the to the following years subcommittee, and we will be doing the survey again next year, and getting new responses, and hopefully have it designed in a way where the actual responses themselves are easier to read. Anybody have anything that they would like to add on this? Add on this agenda point before we move to the next.
I just have a question. Being new here, I don't have information on previous things, but the survey, what people or who were surveyed?
Mm-hmm. So that was sent out to all agencies and entities that are funded by AB 109 dollars. So
okay.
including government departments and different nonprofit agencies. So Denise of ORJ sent that out for us, and I don't know if it would be Denise next year or someone else on the ORJ team who would send an email and then request a response by a certain date, and then compile those and then present those at one of our next meetings. Great question, Dale. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think for me, if we can go, I think two things stand out from this list that may be points, to integrate and further work. One of them is the need to outreach to the community to get community output. And that could be connected to some of the site visits, that we had wanted to do. And it's been more like Zoom presentations, and it's been, certain partners that we've invited here. But that point stands out to me. And then if we can go to the prior list, there's also this piece about collaboration between agencies, which, isn't always the first thing that gets mentioned. Like housing is, and mental health, seem to be the top two that get mentioned. But, collaboration between agencies, it stands out to me, and I am wonder, and I'm curious, what ways the programs and services subcommittee could think about that or make some enhancements or suggestions in that area in the future. All right, so I know I already gave the last invitation for any comments on these themes. I'll do it one more time and then we'll move on to the next agenda item.
I think you mentioned at some point earlier about housing. We have housing agencies, so to speak, that CAB, or at least maybe our committee interacts with. Is that true?
Can you reframe that question, Dale, to make sure that I caught it?
Well, is housing or housing issues a focus by CAB or any of the CAB committees?
That's a great question, and I can start with an answer, and then I'm sure that ORJ and maybe others will have more to add. In our programs and services subcommittee, it's become kind of also like a sub-theme. Nicole Green, who chairs this subcommittee, also works for Shelter Inc. And, we had our presentation at the CAB as well regarding some of the best practices. And I'm sorry, Patrice, it's escaping me, the clearinghouse and the phrase of what's
Evidence-based?
Evidence-based, thank you. Yes, so evidence-based practices. So we had a presentation to the whole CAB on evidence-based practices specifically to the CAB. And so I think that is one of the pieces of of recommendations that the CAB is involved with, and that it's part of our talking points and will become part of our policy, but we didn't have it listed as a special a special theme or topic into our work plan.
Yeah, I'm on the Council on Aging. I'm in the process of being approved for that. And I have been assigned to the housing work group. And so I am thinking that there may be information that I could learn from there that might be helpful here. I just didn't know what might be involved here. Obviously, theirs would be focused on aging, whereas ours here could be a broad spectrum.
That's a great point, Dale. And I would even suggest that, that housing be a topic that, the Programs and Services Subcommittee specifically looks to provide recommendations for the next year if we don't have, more targeted ones that come up in the next month already.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you. ORJ, anything you want to add in response to Dale's question?
Yeah, and forgive me, Lila, if you mentioned this already, but there were a couple of housing related policy recommendations that CAB presented to the CCP last year. And so it continuously comes up, and but just in different forms for CAB, and is directed it through different avenues. So I would definitely agree that it's been a continuous thing, and it's something that CAB has continued to work on and has promoted, even to the degree in previous years where there's been a request for an increase in resources for housing. I think last year your recommendations were a little bit more structured around, okay, now that we have a lot of housing available, is it actually meeting the needs or the unique characteristics within the reentry population? That's something that needs to be looked at. Is there sufficient data that's measuring what are in fact the housing needs of folks who are returning home from incarceration? So there are different ways that CAB has been attacking the issue of housing to ensure that there's adequate housing, available housing, accessible, and it's also accommodating the unique needs of the population. And I would agree with you, Lila. I think it's great that since Programming Services is doing a deep dive into restorative justice, for example, and in the past has done a deep dive in transportation services and has created other sorts of white papers, I think doing something similar around housing will certainly help to inform CAB's budget recommendations around that, or even making any specific requests or recommendations through your ambassador program, for example, that other agencies can take a look at as well.
Yeah, it's certainly important to either prevent or minimize homelessness. That's for sure.
Definitely.
I also want to mention too that on the flip side, through our coordinated entry system, so that is administered through our Health, Housing, and Homeless division. With the Council on Homelessness, they actually have a seat now, a reentry services representative seat. I used to actually serve on as that member, and it's now available for service providers working in the reentry space who want to join Council of Homelessness, so that they can also inform the council of some of the needs of the reentry population that could be incorporated in some of their housing plans as well. So I definitely think that on both ends, there's some room for discussions and coordination about what resources can be made available for this population around housing.
That's great. And I imagine that, at the very least, we could have someone from the Programs and Services Subcommittee, go to that meeting and glean information and bring it back as well. Excellent. Well, let's go ahead and move on to the next agenda item. And that is determine next steps on recommendations from SIMMAP final report to BOSS, specifically number 10. So Nicole, thank you so much for scrolling down to number 10 and for highlighting these pieces in this agenda. That was a huge help. So as you see on the screen, number 10 of the recommendations from this SIM report, that was done in the past is increase equity and access to services regardless of AB 109 funding. My understanding is that there was conversation at the last meeting about this point and importance of it. I'm going to give a really, from high level or from my level explanation of the SIM project. I believe that Jill Ray is still on the call and was involved with this, as were folks from ORJ. But this was a process specifically focused on mental health services and looking at folks involved in incarcerative spaces, and looking at all the different services and places that interacted with folks and where there were holes and gaps, and then coming up with recommendations. And so you can, if you've read the whole document here, you can see a little bit of an outline of that work and that project. And it looks like it was in 2015 that these recommendations were made, and may still be, quite a bit of work remaining in this space. Can someone else help provide a little bit of framing for this conversation based on the last meeting? And or we can, stick with the question of, what does this mean to folks, and what do we want to advocate for around equity and access to service regardless of AB 109 funding?
So I can't stand silence.
Yeah, thank you for helping
I
us
was,
with crickets
well,
there.
I'm sorry, I guess I was asking,
ahead,
trying
Patrice.
to figure out where, yeah, sorry, you were asking if we can give a context to, on this, as it was discussed in your last programs and services meeting? Did I get that right?
Yeah, like if I'm missing something of why this was brought to this meeting, is it basically just we need more conversation about what we think about this point?
About point 10 or about the SIM? Sorry, I'm trying to follow, because I wasn't at the last programs and services,
Yeah.
but I can provide some context where possible.
Point 10, specifically point 10. Jill, did you have something, or, yeah.
I was just trying to understand where this came from, and I'm trying to, a work group of county staff, maybe want to. So I've read this a few times, and I guess I'm just a little lost as to where all of this came from and where it's going. I mean, I know all about the sequential intercept mapping and that whole process and where we are from there, but I'm just, maybe some clarification, and I don't know if Nicole can pull it up, but where did this, I mean, and then I also know that the priority status group was discussed when it came to AB 109 funding quite a few years ago, which was completely separate from the SIM project. That talked about, since we weren't, the AB 109 population was priority for AB 109 funding, but that there was still funding available. So it was opened up to other people who were in re-entry. So, I mean, so this here is separate from SIM in my mind. Are you getting that too, Patrice? Because you were there through this.
Yeah.
part.
Oh, but you know what? Okay, I see. So it's this is part of actually the SIM recommendations. I don't remember in those meetings how, if at all, this came up during that whole process. But what I would at least mention is that many years ago, the CCP, well, as I said here, actually through PPC, approved for AB 109 dollars to be used beyond just the AB 109 individuals that were on AB 109 probation. So, and then this is where they came up with this priority status groups. So all of the funded resources, particularly through the community programs, are open to individuals who fall into any of these categories can access those resources. I think more broadly though, why this may be in the SIM recommendations is that with the expansion of reentry services, there is such nuances and uniqueness among those who are considered to be part of the reentry population. And so being sure that the services that are made available for those who are justice involved are in fact accessible to those who are justice involved. So one consideration is that particularly around housing, that is often a service area that's kind of restrictive when it comes to availability for those who are beyond just AB 109, who are on AB 109 probation. That a lot of times has to do with the fact that those are some specific, slots that are either filled or are not. And so if you prioritize one particular group over another, the best way that can be managed or navigated is, you may want to restrict the number of those from other priority groups from actually accessing slots that are available, to kind of put them on hold for other potential AB 109 individuals that will be on AB 109 probation or coming home from incarceration, things like that. So that limits then the availability of housing for other members that you consider to be justice involved. So I think that's the gist of number 10, saying increase equity and access to services regardless of AB 109 funding. And to some degree, this has us thinking that AB 109 dollars was just really the foundation for creating reentry services. we should be thinking more broadly. And I think that's maybe where Sim is coming from, that resources shouldn't just be limited to that particular pot of funding, that we should expand the pool of funding wherever we can find it, to ensure that then the expansion of resources are more adequate and equal to the actual need that is out there. I hope that all made sense. It made sense in my head, but I hope it came out clear.
Well, and just to piggyback on that, just to be clear, because this just focuses on reentry, the SIM project was actually a whole entire from 0 to, post incarceration. So 0 being the areas where people sort of tend to start going off the rails, let's just say, where they start running into problems in their life, whether it be psychiatric emergency visits, whether it be, the old time crimes that are used against the homeless population, whether it be trespassing or all the rest. So all of it goes from pre-challenges, pre-connections to the criminal justice system to post-connections to the criminal justice system. And all along the way, like all the different points that somebody touches something that could lead them either into treatment or into incarceration. So it's a very broad map. And so it was really identifying gaps. Now, of course, CAB and AB 109 is focused on the reentry population. So that's where you are all today. And I'm not sure what you wanted to do with this section, if you were looking at adjusting it or amending it. I'm not sure what the discussion was about today.
Yeah, and it looks like Dr. Hernandez isn't on the call anymore, and she might have been, in the last conversation and in this conversation. Nicole, you were not at the last programs and services.
No, but I did watch the video, or was I there? Yeah, no, I did right before I left for vacation. But I know as far as why this number 10 came up, it was a matter of what can this subcommittee do with this particular recommendations, and the focus was for this subcommittee to look at number 10 specifically, looking at the scope of what CAB is charged to do as far as their mission. And that was where the subcommittee landed on taking on number 10. Whether or not there was work to be done on number 10, as far as it was just more of understanding number 10 and needing to review it further as far as defining what recommendations would need to come out of this work.
And with Patrice's, comment, I heard kind of two things, or maybe I was thinking I was hearing one thing. So I heard you saying, Patrice, that sometimes we try to do too much with AB 109 funding, and it's not available for those who it's intended for, was maybe part of it. How do you make sure that folks qualify for the service even if they don't meet the definition? Maybe the other side of that. And I'm just trying to make sense of this. Are we advocating that AB 109 dollars be available for a broader group of people, or are we saying that we need to expand AB 109 dollars and also expand those who qualify for those services?
So that's a tough one, because this was sort of codified within SIM's process, which looks beyond AB 109, right? And is acknowledging that though housing is being supported through AB 109 resources, that there should be room for other resources to be made available wherever you can find that pot of money, right? Or pots of money, to kind of help offset the limitations that AB 109 funded housing programs might be presenting. So in that regards, I'm not quite sure if CAB can actually go to CCP to say, hey, we need you guys to find more money elsewhere for, you know, I don't know if that would be the appropriate route to go. I think one thing that I would recommend is sort of a follow-up on the CAB recommendations that you guys have on housing already, which, you know, teaser, we will be, ORJ will at least be speaking to that for the November CCP meeting. Those were one of the recommendations that was set to be agendized. So, so we can speak a little bit to that in regards to how we can maybe work with H3 to see what other resources are available through the coordinated entry system, where there's maybe better matching of folks who we know or have identified as being justice involved. So that way, if they can't access some of the AB1 funded housing, then maybe there's existing resources elsewhere. So I'm not sure if that quite answered your question, but I think, again, because it was placed within SIM, which is looking beyond AB 109, I think that was the call to all of the stakeholders there. Like, let's look at other ways that we can build from AB 109, find other sources of funding so that there's sufficient housing that's then not limited based on that particular funding source.
And if I just jump on that, I have to jump off to another meeting in a few minutes. I think that's where Nicole went, but I think, you know, your question was, could, and Patrice pointed to, could you advocate to CCP to look for other monies? And I don't think it's CCP that would, but certainly like H3, when they do contracts, they encourage their applicants, their CBOs, to spread their funding out amongst various sources so that they're not single sourced. And so I do think that there's a way that that could be tied into any recommendations that you make, because you're talking to CCP, but it's actually departments. And so, you know, and CBOs, and encouraging them to not single source their funding, because then, you know, if their funding gets cut, they're gone. And I just think that that's sort of the wave that a lot of different departments go. As far as changing that recommendation, I think that was a pretty strong recommendation. It went through a lot of discussions, and it already does expand services to beyond the AB 109. And I think Jana pointed out that Jana's money doesn't all, I don't think Jana's money all comes from AB 109. Maybe it does, but like they're very small AB 109 population that participates. You know, so I think the one area, and maybe I'm wrong, Patrice, because you're closer to it all, but I think the one area where it really is tight to expand beyond AB 109 is housing, because there's a certain number of beds that have been traditionally available. And so there hasn't really been much beyond the AB 109 population. And I think that that's where CAB has advocated in the past for more and expanded contracts for more permanent supportive housing options, longer term transitional housing options. And so those are ways that I know that you guys have advocated in the past for a broader, sort of a broader reentry population. And I don't know that anybody's been turned away other than for housing, for services throughout reentry.
Yeah, and you're right, Jill. It's mostly around housing. That's where there's the limitation, which is what was called out in that SIM recommendation.
And it sounds
there's some departments that are taking, you know, I can say probation has used some of its own funding to be able to house those who are on general supervision. So, which is sort of the next layer down on that list of priority groups. So they've looked, you know, themselves, they're like, we really want to serve our entire probation clientele in housing. We don't want them to be limited just to the AB 109 resources. If it becomes available to them at all, we can put dollars to housing or providing some housing resources to our general supervision. So, you know, so kind of to Jill's point, you can advocate in your various recommendations, even a call out to specific departments who can maybe look into what resources that they have holistically to carve out some room or some resources for that particular population.
Got it.
Mostly housing, so that's H3. That'd be H3.
Yeah, so, okay, so it sounds to me like there's some movement and the CAB has already recommended that at some point, but it is something that we could ask to be in the talking points, is expanding housing, expanding funding for housing beyond just AB 109 folks. Okay. All right, well, we're just about out of time here, and I do want to respect everything that folks have got waiting for them, including lunch and all that good stuff. I just wanted to, to pull up our work plan here to ground us in this, for next steps, for next meeting. So a number of next steps, have already been identified in the meeting. And so, hopefully we'll pick those right up with the notes from the meeting and with next meeting. So the first category for our work plan has been the research projects and advocacy in support of CAB policy platform, where we have focused lots of learnings on the restorative justice services in the county and potentially where they're not. The second area has been, publishing reports on existing program and services. So that was, the information that we took from the prior survey and, what we've gleaned from that. And then the last area is probably the area maybe where we've actually spent the least time defining and moving things forward. I could be wrong, but that's been program and services qualitative data collection and looking at local, regional, national needs assessment to reentry populations. So we did take a look at the SIM map and get some idea of, services that are already in existence. So, with our remaining 2 minutes and our remaining, 3 meetings or so, I'd just like to see if, anybody has anything that they'd like to call out that we need to see happen at the next meeting in order to move either one of these 3 areas, most likely the first and the third forward, since the second one, is mostly taken care of.
I'm wondering about the site visits in number 3. How has that been done, and has it been fruitful?
Thank you. And this will probably be our last, thing that we can discuss today, and then we can adjourn. We have not done site visits because of COVID. We have had some agencies come here and present, and we've had conversations offline and we've gleaned information. And so I think that while site visits was listed there, that the process was more like gaining information, researching, and hearing presentations.
Okay.
Good question, Dale.
But thank you.
Yeah. All right, well, we will go ahead and adjourn today's meeting and look forward to, coming back together in person at the date for the information that Nicole will send out. Thank you all for joining and have a great day.
Well, hey, Lila, really quickly, just to confirm, would you like to have item 1 and 3 of your work plan agendized for the next subcommittee meeting?
Yes, let's do that.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay, all right.
Yeah.
sounds good.
let's do that. That's great.
Okay, all right, thank you
All right,
all.
thank you. Bye-bye.